throw into space there from Minnesota. And another one.
Garlock there to tip it, but it's caught by Bergmeyer off the ricochet. Wow. The Berg bounce.
Welcome back. It's Swing Pass. I'm Adam. That's Daniel. We've got a Week 9 preview pod coming at you. Just only 10 games this week after 3 straight 13 game schedule slates the past few weekends. We've got 5 regular season weekends left in the 2023 schedule. So we're really coming down to the playoff push and the wire. A lot of teams starting to get to the tail end of their schedule. So each result going forward seems to bear a lot more weight and significance. And that is definitely true in these matchups this weekend. We will be taking a bite out of 4 of the bigger matchups ahead in the schedule, starting with on Friday night, Indy, 5-2, sitting in second place in the Central Division, heading to Breese Stevens Field to take on the reeling 1-5 Madison Radicals, sitting on the doorstep of missing their 4th straight postseason after winning the 2018 AUDL title. The Radicals continue to play well throughout most of their games, but at this point, there are no more moral victories for this Radicals franchise. They really want to assert themselves in the win column against their divisional rivals, where they've been particularly susceptible at their home field, where they were so unbeatable for so long. I mean, even talking about this AlleyCats team, the last time that they played at Breese Stevens Field last year, they got that all-important buzzer-beating 2-goal win to make it into the postseason via Cameron Brock, via their kind of more established offensive system. And now the 2023 AlleyCats head in again tomorrow night to Madison, and they look even better this year. Their defense is playing amplified. They returned Travis Carpenter into their lineup. He's been such a good fulcrum for this offense for years and years. Cameron Brock, Levi Jacobs, all playing at elevated levels. Xavier Payne has shifted to offense. He looks so good this year. What are you looking forward to in this AlleyCats Madison matchup?
I'm looking forward to just another close game in Madison. It's been very clear they've been in these games at least in the third quarter. Like, there's always a time, even in that game against Minnesota, where yes, it was a 5-goal loss in the end, but they were within a couple goals in the third quarter, and they go on these runs. It's just like, can Madison close out a game is the biggest question that is always looming in my mind. And I feel like we've seen that be an issue for Indy in years past, but I feel like they've kind of overcome that in recent seasons, especially this year. I mean, this 5-game winning streak has been no fluke. They've looked very good. I'm just excited to see like the later portions of this game, who can really like take the momentum and seize it. You always think the Madison Radicals playing in front of the Breese Stevens crowd should have that energy on their side, but I don't know, maybe it's the youth of the roster getting like a little too excited at times and still kind of getting back into the mistakes that cause them to be in these early game deficits. But it's still an opportunity every time they're playing in front of this crowd to really just seize the momentum and close out the game. We just haven't really seen that yet.
You talk about that Indy offensive execution and what's led to their 5-game no-fluke winning streak to put them in second place. I mean, this AlleyCats offense in 3 of their last 4 games has converted on, 63% or better of their offensive possessions. This is one of the higher performing offenses in the league over the past month or so. And granted, they get the benefit of playing at home indoors, but if you look at the film right now, the AlleyCats are just executing at a high level. They swing the disc well. They get everyone involved really well. There's not really a cog without oil, so to speak, within the system. Everything is kind of moving off of each other. Everyone seems to be playing at an elevated level, and they're very unselfish with the disc. And then defensively, and I've talked to you about this a few times recently, off air, but this AlleyCats squad is a bit bigger than people think. They will be without main defender Jake Fella this weekend, but even without him, this AlleyCats D-line has a lot of interesting height pieces and just, I think, size in their matchups that opponents aren't quite getting used to in the beginning half of the season. And I think that they're really going to have to adjust as they head towards the postseason. The rookie, William Wettengel, is one of the block leaders in the league this year. Fletcher Hare has been great as providing help over the top. Jeff Burris is a bigger defender than people think, and he makes plays in space really well. They have a nice set of, I think, again, like height and sort of flexibility in how they can provide help defense that is allowing them to have a really good kind of canopy level defense over the top and not necessarily have a whole bunch of blown coverages or missed hucks over the top. It feels like they allow opposing offenses to play in front of them, which allows them to generate a few more turnovers than they have in the past. And they still have this excellent, efficient counterattack that provides them a handful of breaks every game. It's a really well-oiled system. It executes at a high level, and it feels like they're one of the best teams in the league. It's sort of winning close margin games because of how well their offense is executing and how well their defense takes advantages of their opportunities.
Yeah, it's been really cool to see their growth this year because, like you said, defensively, I just think they're getting more takeaways this year. Like, they just have more guys stepping up and making plays. And like you said, that D-line conversion percentage, I think they're above 60%, maybe 61%. And I think they set the record last year at like 66%. So down a little bit, but still operating like at the efficiency rate as a top O-line. It's just so nice to have that on your D-line, and the fact that they're getting more opportunities every single game, like, and their offense on the other side has gotten better with the addition of Travis Carpenter. I want to go back to your point about them like swinging the disc well. They have like some of the most consistent resets and just like patient drives that I've seen in the entire Central Division this year. And really like a lot of capable throwers all across that line. You even have like Cam Brock taking stretches where he might find himself in the backfield, but still totally comfortable with the disc. I trust everyone on that O-line. And then you look at Madison on the other side, and it's like, it's hard. Pat Schreiwise, we trust, right? He is back in the lineup this game.
Yeah, but to your point, it's a complete juxtaposition. The Indy offense is as patient as it needs to be on every drive that matters, whereas Madison, they're a little college-minded, for lack of a better way to put it right now. They get to about 5 or 6 passes, and they really want to start engaging the field vertically. They really want to get out in a fast break, huck it to their playmakers in one-on-one, trust their teammates. And with playmakers like Anthony Gumby-Gutowski, they've been able to do that and float some of their possessions. But on a quarter-to-quarter basis, there's really no consistency with this Radicals offense. And you're correct. They do return Pat Schreiwise this week, as well as Jack Kelly to the offense. Nico Ronabat as well was missing last weekend. He might play this weekend. He's been getting reps on the offense. David Nestor got a start last week after suffering from a broken foot that kept him sidelined for a few weeks this season. He looks to be a nice complement alongside Anthony Gutowski. So health is still improving a little bit for this Radicals roster. But again, it's going to be maybe the 6th new offensive rotation that they've had in 6 games this year, right? Or 7 games. Like, it just feels like every week there's a new tweak, a new piece, a new adaptation due to who's playing well, who's hurt, who's kind of available. Like, this Radicals team can't get any kind of rotational consistency. And on the opposite sideline, there's the absolute emblem of what you want kind of from
since
offensive
2012.
stability.
I mean, the AlleyCats O-line has just been together for so long. But like, when you look at Madison, I don't know if it's just a chemistry issue. It might just be like a system-wide issue and like what they're trying to do with each offensive possession. Or you might just look at some individuals that have throwaway issues at times. Like Henry Goldenberg was trending in the right direction, kind of getting better every game, but then had a 6 throwaway game this past weekend against Minnesota. So you're not getting the level of consistency from the guys that are like touching the disc the most to bring any sort of stability to the Radicals O-line right now. I do think defensively, though, that's kind of why they've been in so many games. Like they still have that ability to go on these like break runs. If they can get some momentum going in the second and third quarters, they look really good at times, just in their ability to play make and then take advantage of turnovers. So it's going to be interesting. It's tough to get this AlleyCats O-line out of rhythm, but you never know. It's an outdoor game. I view that as a slight advantage as opposed to the indoor ones, but yeah, we'll see what happens.
Well, a big indicator in recent years for the AlleyCats making the postseason has been getting a win at Breese Stevens Field. So if they get a win tomorrow night, that'll make it 6 in a row. They'll improve to 6-2. They'll sit virtually a half game back in Minnesota, who faces an all-important matchup in Colorado, which we'll get to next on Saturday night. But in the opposite column for Madison, if they lose this game, if they fall to 1-6, that effectively ends their postseason chances this year. Do you agree?
Yep. No, I agree. I think the math just won't really work out in their favor unless Chicago just has like a disastrous stretch to end the season. They've got back-to-back Detroit games this weekend.
I mean, Pittsburgh too. Pittsburgh is right there too.
They still have to go to
Madison,
Pittsburgh. Yeah. Pittsburgh is losing.
Madison's got to climb over 2 teams now from 1-6. It feels like you're 5 feet deep in a 6-foot grave at that point.
And like the fact that they would be 1-6 if they lose this game, I would not be super confident in their ability to win out the rest of the season. Like they still have to play some of these other teams. They haven't played Detroit at all, so they will have a couple games there to get back on track. But yeah, I think it'll be too little too late if Madison can go on some kind of late season run, especially if they lose this one. So yeah, I would all but count them out if they fall to Indy.
So Indy looking for the win tomorrow night. Madison trying to save their season once again for the third straight weekend. It feels like it's just a month of arduousness for this Radical team, just trying to stay alive in that Central Division playoff race. But Indy hoping to win, and then the next night hoping for the Summit to win as they get set to try to snap, I should say, their 3-game losing streak at home as they get set to host the 6-1 rolling wind chill in the AUDL game of the week. That'll be broadcast live on AUDL.tv. I'm really looking forward to this matchup. I know we kind of talked about it the other day. I went into this season just kind of circling this as almost like an easy win for a Colorado team that seemed to have one of the most imposing defenses, had one of the most impressive offensive attacks last year. The Summit look equally talented this year. I don't think they are by any stretch a bad team, but they are certainly going through it right now, right? They've lost 3 straight times in a row by 1 goal each. And while they've been in all these games, it's suddenly this thing of, for as good and talented and kind of injury plagued as Colorado has been with some of their absences, particularly on the defense, for all these sort of like good feeling, good vibes, good moral victories stuff that's happening, they sit on the precipice of really falling behind the 8 ball in this West Division playoff race all of a sudden. And they face a wind chill team that definitely will challenge them defensively. And on offense right now, Colorado has all the playmaking in the world, but they can't quite seem to settle on a style. I mean, they'll be returning Jonathan Nethercutt to the lineup this week. He was absent last weekend. You could visibly see his lacking impact there in the kind of like fourth quarter stretch when Salt kept making plays and Colorado just kind of kept sustaining and lingering around and hoping for something to break their way. It didn't. Shred got that all-important victory to improve to 8-0. I'm starting to ramble. I feel like this is a more important game for Colorado than maybe we kind of have been thinking of the past couple of days. This feels actually like they can afford an interdivisional loss right now with the way that LA and Oakland are playing and the way that they all sit at 5-3 in a virtual tie for second place in the West Division.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that fourth quarter against Salt Lake. It was kind of the same thing against Oakland too. Like Summit were playing with a lead for a lot of that game, but yeah, it was just like
they're up 17-13.
Yeah, it was just like getting complacent offensively. Like when you didn't have Nethercutt in the lineup, there was no like urgency to kind of answer with a big play after Oakland was just rattling these off in the fourth quarter. And yeah, I think his presence is a big deal. And the first game of this 3-game losing streak, we saw Nethercutt playing defense for the first half of that game against Salt Lake. So I think they just need to go back to basics, let Nethercutt be the quarterback, structure things around him. You get Atkins going downfield a little bit more too. Like I love Atkins as a thrower, but I think I don't want that offense to be like so Alex Atkins centric and just be driven by his give and goes and facilitation throughout the field. I like them a lot better when it's Nethercutt is the fulcrum. You've got these hybrid pieces kind of everywhere you look on the O-line. That's what we saw most of the time last year, and it worked out really well. Obviously, they won the West Division, went to championship weekend. So yeah, I think they just need to get back to basics, keep Spicer on defense. I know he played very well on offense against Salt Lake, but I still think you need the defensive player of the year doing his thing, trying to force turnovers and getting that D-line some opportunities to get some breaks. But yeah, Minnesota is not going to be an easy opponent. Abe Coffin is coming back this week. He was injured in their second game of the season against Pittsburgh. So that's a big addition for this Minnesota O-line that has been like just making things work really since Coffin went out. They've had like a lot of lineup inconsistencies with missing throwers. Like Josh Klain has missed a game or two. I know they haven't had Will Brandt for a lot of the season. He's also active for this game. So this is looking like one of the better wind chill offenses that we'll have seen this year. So that combined with like all the success we've seen from that wind chill D-line, there's going to be a lot of pressure on this Colorado team to kind of keep pace with a Minnesota team that I think can set the tone very early in this game.
So you bring up a really interesting point, which is you kind of assuming that Coffin will just slot into offense. I know that's where we talked about him playing going into
I think
the
I
season,
want him there.
But hear me out. The team will be without Sam Berglund, who, while Coffin, I think, is still clearly the most talented player in this team, something that's been absolutely lacking. He was the All-Star Game MVP last fall. We've talked about this a bunch of times. The skill level of Abe Coffin is clearly on display every single time he's healthy and steps onto the field. But as far as the team MVP for this wind chill team has gone for the first 7 games of their season, I think it's got to be Berglund. I mean, his pulls last weekend against Madison, his throwing range, the way he just kind of has a confidence in picking up and engaging counterattacks, drives, his size in matchup defense. Like, he just gives a lot of tools to this Minnesota team who has been looking for rotation fillers as they've struggled with lineup absences, injuries, et cetera, et cetera. And Berglund has just been able to fill wherever they've needed him. And he will be out this weekend. He will not be active in Colorado. And so I'm wondering if you then use Abe Coffin's killer pulls and play another field position game similar to the one that they had last week against the Radicals, against a Summit team that has been struggling to find offensive consistency. It feels like the fulcrum of this game will be how can the very imposing, blitz-heavy, full-field defense of Minnesota contain a Colorado attack looking to activate off of the best throwing talent in the league in Nethercut, right? Like, it feels like Minnesota is going to present a kind of coverage strategy that Colorado may not be familiar with, and Coffin's pulls could really set them up favorably in some of those matchups. I think it's a little bit difficult to ask somebody to go out and play defense if they haven't been up to game speed for like a month, but if there's ever a player to kind of do it, I feel like it's Abe Coffin. And we saw the power of those pulls last year. I mean, they got a couple of Callahans and short field scores last year when Coffin was put into D-line roles. And so I just feel like as good as Abe is as a thrower, and as much as I want to see his backhands just flying at elevation, I think that his most utilitarian role for this team heading into this matchup at the Summit is putting him on defense and letting him work a field position game that worked so well last weekend. I'm kind of falling in love with how Minnesota utilizes this new pulling rules, how they really pressure teams in those first 2 throws, and how they kind of settle in over the course of the game of just eliciting a certain anxiety every single time they're making you march 90 yards just to get a goal.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I think I will probably see Abe Coffin do some sort of split on offense and defense realistically. I mean, we haven't seen him play like full-time defense yet this season. I mean, obviously it's only been 2 games, but yeah, that was his role last year. He was designated puller, designated D-line quarterback, and it does make a lot of sense without kind of his replacement available in Berglund this week. I could definitely see him filling that role again. So should be interesting because I think Minnesota is also capable of switching those guys around mid-game, and like Bevon always kind of crosses between offense and defense. So like the in-game adjustments between both of these teams, because obviously we had Spicer and Nethercut who started flip-flopped against that first Salt Lake game and then flipped back at halftime. I'm curious kind of what the coaching chess match and adjustments look like throughout this one as well. There's a lot of like stars that can move around, you know?
Yeah. Two other names I wanted to bring up that weren't active last week for either team that I think will have immediate impacts for both squads is Quinn Snyder for Minnesota and Alex Tatum for Colorado. Starting with the latter, Tatum, I just think his defensive playmaking, his sort of presence, his ability to throw and lead on the counterattack has been sorely missed from the Summit when he was out last weekend in their road trip. I mean, they got, 8 blocks in 2 games? And I know part of that was Spicer having to shift to offense, but I think it was also the absences of Tatum, Said Semrin, who will be out again this week, who I think still leads the team in blocks. Like, they're missing some of their biggest playmakers. And again, we went into this season, and in the first few weeks, we saw what this fully charged Colorado defense is capable when they were holding a whole bunch of teams under 16 goals and getting 12 plus blocks a game. But now, having sustained some injuries, the depth isn't quite there for the Summit as all these resurgent offenses kind of take shape in the middle part of the summer in that division, with Oakland, LA, even Seattle looking pretty good offensively. And it's just, I think it's a test right now for the Summit to kind of find where their stabilizing pieces are. I mean, even Matthew Agee, as phenomenal as a playmaker as he is, he's been limited somewhat by injuries and hamstring issues this year. And so it's just, I think it's a lot of adversity that the Summit just did not face at all in year one. Last year was such a sheet cake of winning. Like, it just felt like they launched out of the gate and just kept going all the way until they ran into Chicago championship weekend. All due respect to the San Diego Growlers, who got that regular season win against the Summit and unseated them from their perfect season. But it just felt like the Summit ran through the West Division in year one and were the clear thoroughbred front runners. And now in year two, it's everyone else reminding them, not so fast. We're pretty good too. We've got a lot of young talent too. We talked about how Colorado seemed to have this depth and this pool that maybe exceeded the other teams that they were going to face off against in this West Division slate. And through the first 8 weeks, that's just not true this year, right? Like, these other teams are equally deep and equally hungry to get into the postseason this year. And now all of a sudden it's running up against Colorado, who again is playing really well. Like, this is not any worse of a Summit team, but they're losing games, and they're suddenly going to find themselves looking up in the standings for the first time. I mean, this is the team's first ever losing streak.
How much do you compare this Colorado team to past Carolina teams? Is there a similar vibe going on with like those Carolina 1-goal losses we saw in 2021 and like their early season struggles this year, where like you're not too worried about them long term, but maybe the losses are more notable for Colorado given how much tighter this division seems for those 3 playoff spots? Because there are kind of 4 teams right now battling for 3 spots, whereas with Carolina, it's like a given all year that they'll be in the playoffs one way or another.
I still think Colorado is too supremely talented to really worry at this point. Like, I completely agree with Quinn Finer's sentiments that he told to Evan Lepler in this week's Tuesday Toss of we're not anywhere near pressing the panic button. I think if they lose on Saturday, that button becomes a lot larger and a lot more visible. Like, it's astounding to me, right? Like, they got these 3 losses in the course of 8 days. If they lose this week, it'll be 4 losses in virtually 2 weeks. And it will completely upend what we've thought of this team. We were kind of talking about it off air. I don't think even I have an appreciation for the formatting of a week-to-week schedule in the larger scope of how Ultimate is consumed and how we progress through teams. In the amateur divisions, it's these tournaments that come up once every 4 weeks, every 5 weeks, and teams bring various formations of their rosters. Some are full strength, some are not. Some are bringing more developmental versions. Some are waiting to add pieces. It's never really set as to who's good and win until you get to the series at the end of the year and everyone starts actually applying themselves. And so this whole thing of kind of having a little bit of a work through period, a little bit of some tough losses, some moral victories, some learning, some tweaking, that's all well and good. But then all of a sudden, because of how the week-to-week win-loss records go in the AUDL, you have this Colorado team who's suddenly on the verge of sustaining 4 losses in under 3 weeks. And it just, again, they're not any different of a team. This is still I think the same Colorado team, if you were to just list on a paper at full strength, at full health, you would consider probably to be the top 2, 3, 4 team in the league. But right now, given how results are going, it's like they might be sitting behind Oakland and LA after this weekend. Like, that's nuts. That's nuts. That's no real like fault of Colorado. Like, again, I just want to keep reiterating, they're not playing poorly. Their adversaries are just taking advantage of them at the end of games.
Yeah. Who would you favor in this game, by the way? Or like, what's your line? Colorado, Minnesota.
I think I still favor Colorado. I still think that they are a self-aware enough team to make the corrections necessary. I think, again, they did what they could last week, given their absences to their lineup. I wasn't unimpressed with how they approached those games. I just thought down the stretch, they lack some of that juice that has always carried them over in previous matchups and going back into last season. They just didn't, not to just become overly redundant or reductive, but like they didn't have it. Their opponents did. Like, you could just see Salt Lake in the way that they were playmaking at the end of that game. It just felt like they were running downhill towards the W, where every pass on Colorado's kind of final few possessions just felt like attrition, including the last one that ended up in the Everett Saunders interception. Like, that's been Colorado's story. Like, and again, the next day, like it's Alex Atkins laying out onto his bad shoulder to save possessions in the waning moments of the fourth quarter after they had a 4-goal second half lead. Like, they're just, the bad breaks are adding up and they're coming in increasing velocity. And that's just something Colorado hasn't quite dealt with before in this format. They're capable of doing it. And I wouldn't be surprised if they have maybe a statement 5-goal win against Minnesota, who will be playing at elevation and playing kind of in the particular environment where the Summit team really supercharges, But again, like it's such an interesting contrasting of styles. It feels like Colorado, in order to become them peak selves, have to get the nether cut bombs going, have to get that kind of offensive swagger. And all Minnesota wants to do is turn the lights off and just make you play rock fight ball, make you play Big Ten football.
Well,
ground game.
That's kind of what happened in the semifinals last year with Chicago. Like, Colorado was never in rhythm with like any sort of deep game, any sort of like swaggery offense. Like, it was just totally different than what we saw most of the season from them in the West Division. So I do still worry a little bit. Like, can Minnesota come in and just like mess up everything Colorado wants to do offensively? Or is Nethercutt back in the lineup? He's going to have a Nethercutt game and Colorado is going to kind of hit their stride again. It's just, Minnesota's a tough team to like get back on track against. So I don't know. I have a lot of doubt there. If I was setting the line for this game, I think I would just go dead even. I don't think I favor either team, but I don't know. I'd probably lean towards picking Colorado to win just because of the home crowd. But I'm not confident in it. I'm a little worried.
The thing about Nethercutt's throws is that you can only game plan so much against that man, right? Like, because one of the things that Minnesota did really well last weekend was they disabled Madison's ability to get into power position for their throwers. They made, if you wanted to throw deep last weekend as the Radicals, you had to throw flat-footed, basically from a disadvantageous position, not in any kind of momentum, not with any sort of favorable look. Nethercutt can do that and peg someone from 80 yards away, running at full speed. Like Madison, and no one else, this isn't Madison's fault, but no other team in the league has a Nethercutt. Like, if there's one player who can just tear through what Minnesota's kind of been developing, it's Jonathan Nethercutt at elevation playing with Jay Fruit, Alex Atkins, Quinn Finer, etc. on offense. Like, this is sort of the scenario that could really undo the ideas we've been building up about how potent this wind chill attack is. So I'm just so interested to see which style resolves itself on Saturday night in that game of the week matchup. But I wanted to move forward. We should move to 2 other games on Saturday night. Let's start with the battle for second place in the East Division. The 4-2 DC Breeze heading on the road. Their second game of the weekend, they will be playing on Friday night in Montreal and then going on the road again on Saturday to face the 4-3 Boston Glory. Boston has lost 3 out of their last 4 games. They're backpedaling a bit after starting the season 3-0. Meanwhile, the Breeze still look like a supercharged team this year, but as you and I have been talking about, Daniel, there's sort of this, there's one quarter where the Breeze look like the absolute championship team version of themselves. They did it in the fourth quarter against the Royale. They went an 8-run run. Their defense is just playing fireworks mode. They're running out in transition. Thomas Edmonds is playing both ways. Everything looks great. But then they have these like 1 to 2 head fever kind of quarters where Montreal is just lingering around. They're just kind of there. They're hanging out. Like they did it against the Phoenix earlier this year where it felt like they were maybe going to widen the gap more. And nope, instead, Phoenix is just going to keep it close and kind of ride it to a really close finish. Like this Breeze team, for as much talent as they have and for as much playmaking and everything else, it feels like there's a little bit of a separation curve this year. Now, again, obviously, you look at the final score of that Montreal game, and it looks like an absolute blowout. But for 3 quarters, the Royale hung around, and they just sort of were there. And DC would have these sort of offensive fits of looking really good one possession and then looking a little lost for 2 to 3 possessions following.
It's been a weird year for DC. Like they've definitely not lived up to quite the hype that we built up for them, or they built up for themselves this offseason. I think when you look at them, and I know they were your preseason pick to win it all this year, but when you look at like, yeah, I stand by them, good. When you look at like the, I don't know, championship contenders from around the league, no other team offensively that you like really consider able to win a championship has these like weird spells that DC has. Like we don't really see that from New York. You don't see that from like the top lineup of Carolina. It's something that I think they like, I attribute it sort of to their new additions, but it's just something that like as the season has gone on, they haven't really moved towards like solving any of it, right? Like it's kind of the same problems we saw from them in the first couple games. And I know they won that first game against Carolina. That was a good win, but their offense still looked weird, and it's kind of continued to look weird throughout the season. Like you said, stretches where it's great. Obviously, they deserve credit for closing out that game against Montreal last week, and the fact that they are 4-2, they are like a good team, obviously. But yeah, I think just the weirdness of the offense can't continue into like the late season and the postseason, obviously, because as they play teams like Philly and New York down the stretch, the margins are just going to be that much tighter. And last year when they went to Boston, which they are going to Boston this week, right? That's the games in Boston.
2 road games.
That was like another uncharacteristically weird game for them offensively. I think they had around 20 turnovers in that game. It was like very back and forth with against a Boston team that really was not impressive at all last year. We can just call that what it is. I mean, they haven't been like a good team in the East really in their franchise history. And I think seeing DC struggle with them last year, it gives me a little bit of hesitation to think that they can just come into Boston and win easily this weekend. But Boston does have a lot of absences on their side, notably on offense. What is it? Ray Tetro, Ben Sadok,
Orion
Cable, the biggest guy out there.
Kind of large.
Yeah, they're gonna have to adjust, and I don't think Boston has really shown so much depth this season to be able to handle those top end losses. But you never know. Playing at home against a DC team that has been a little up and down this year, I wouldn't rule out Boston to pull off this upset.
Also of note, Chris Bartoli will be out for the Boston defense, so they're ostensibly missing their best defender as well. And yet, given how Boston has won games this year, it's been because of break train runs and them taking advantage of opposing offenses lacking rhythm. And so, if there is an opponent for them to take advantage of playing their second game in as many days and maybe having some fits and discipline issues when they expect to be up more against a Boston team that is lacking some of its stars but still has a lot of fiery young talent. Yeah, I'm just saying, if this game appears closer than it should maybe in the second half, don't get too surprised because, again, it's one of those stylistic things. Like, Boston's offense hasn't necessarily been how they've been winning these games so far this year. It's been their defense and Brendan McCann and Rocco Linehan and sort of them getting out into transition. Whereas their offense, while having all this kind of firepower to it, goes through lulls. And that's what happened last week against New York, when New York's defense just detonated open their lead early in the game once Boston kind of started to have some reset troubles with the disc. Like, Boston could potentially do that to DC given their struggles. I wouldn't say I expect it. I still think I have DC favored by a few goals, but
yeah,
if they do experience problems, this is a Glory team apt to take advantage of them. And if they do get a win, that will put them in a almost tie for second place in the East Division, which would just be a huge monkey wrench, I think, in DC's plans going into the home stretch. They've still got another matchup with New York. They've still got another matchup with Philly, who looks like a completely different team than the first time the Breeze played the Phoenix. So it's not like these feel like very winnable games for a Breeze team that hasn't even played its best performance, I think, in 2023. But at the same time, Boston is tooth and nail right now. Like, their season's kind of on the line. I know they have a win over Philly still in an all-important matchup coming up, I believe, 3 weeks? I can't quite remember when round 2. But Boston wants this game, and I feel like given how DC played in Boston last year, if that replicates itself this year, their D-line counterattack is way more equipped to take advantage of a close game than they were in 2022. But we'll move on to our final preview for this episode, a SoCal West Division clash, one that always seems to come down to the wire, and that's why we're choosing to highlight it. That's the 2-5 San Diego Growlers going to face the absolutely flying LA Aviators, who are 5-3, have won 4 in a row, have kind of completely flipped around their season after starting 1-2, losing new addition Jason Valley to an injury, having some lineup instabilities. It feels like they just flicked a switch, and now all of a sudden they look like this team that we were so excited about heading into the season, where Sean McDougal and Pavel Janis just give them one of the best 2-1-2 punches in the league. I mean, I think that both of them are hurting each other's almost MVP candidacy this year, because it feels like as soon as you start to favor one or love the way that the one brings like to this team's offense and to this team's playmaking, the other one will step up and kind of show you, hey, it's this as well. I mean, obviously this is a team game. They rely on each other. But again, I've just been so impressed with how McDougal and Giannis have just elevated their play, and how it just seems to have been the rising tide that's lifting all boats. And also, your and I's defensive player of the year so far, Lucas Ambrose, just going nutty on D-line, just flying missile every week. Like, it's kind of incredible how quickly the Aviators have suddenly found this really resilient identity in the middle of the season. It felt like we were maybe a year away from them kind of picking up where they are right now in the middle of June.
It was weird to think, like, earlier in the season, or probably before the season, we were talking about LA. It was like, yeah, they got all these nice additions to the offense, at least, in Pavel and Sean McDougal probably slotting in there. But we were like, still a lot of questions on defense. They don't really have, like, a playmaker. They don't really force turnovers, not much of a counterattack. But yeah, I feel like Ambrose has kind of changed that entire narrative. And yeah, the fact that they've done all this and had the success without Jason Valley, who that first week of the season against Colorado, he was like the every other handler alongside Pavel. Like, he would have been a huge asset for this D-line to have on the counterattack and just in coverage this whole season. But they've been without him and really have just kind of embraced their new defensive identity. And Ambrose himself, he had 4 blocks last time they played San Diego. He was taking that Travis Dunn matchup most of that game, who will be out, notably, this weekend. So I don't know. I just feel like whoever Ambrose is on, good luck. I mean, that guy is just going to rack up blocks all year. I'm so impressed with his ability to just like peel off at any time too. Like, it does not matter who he's actually like covering. He's always going to help deep, and he's probably one of the best in the league at doing that right now. And then offensively, I do want to take some time. Sean McDougal, I think is I don't know, a top 2 MVP candidate right now. Like, in my mind, it is him.
Not wrong.
I think it's him over Pavel. I think what he brings defensively too, you just don't get that out of offensive players. And Jeff Babbitt, kind of the other MVP candidate on our mind, obviously has that defensive ability too. But Sean McDougal, it's defense, it's the throwing, it's obviously the deep speed and downfield receiving threat that he brings. I think he's probably had like the best all-around season to this point that we've seen from anyone in the league. So I definitely think he deserves consideration in the final stretch of the season as like a true MVP candidate. I think 2018 was the last time he was like firmly in the MVP conversation in that run that LA had to championship weekend. But
all due respect to his stat totals that year, but I don't think I would qualify him as like an MVP candidate. That LA team was really, really deep, and he got a bunch of goals and I think like 24 blocks that year. He was undoubtedly their top playmaker. I think first or second team all AUDL, but I would pump the brakes a little bit on him being MVP because at that point, he still wasn't a thrower. The throwing era
The throwing
didn't really begin until 2019 when they got all those rookies. They got Jose Jimenez and like this resurgent Aviators team after losing a whole bunch of talent after their championship weekend run in 2018. And so McDougal had to assume more of a throwing role. And I remember 2019 just being blown away at the repertoire he had after watching him for years to that point. Like, the backhand throws. His backhand over the last 4 years has evolved into one of the best in the division, if not the league. He had it again on Sunday against Seattle where he doesn't use it often, but man, when he just steps into it from range, it's so just clean. Like crisp and perfect. And for years, that was a man who like you were a little nervous about him making reset passes and like dump throws because all he wanted to do was keep running upfield. Like he was just so insistent on running. So to see him evolve into this more well-rounded playmaker, this like hand block specialist, like you talk about him on defense, him on the mark right now. Like he is getting a hand block almost every other game. And it's just him settling in and like this just him and Fairfax. It's him and Fairfax as like the two alpha players following turnovers that I think you just don't even want him near the disc. Like just have someone take him away from whatever you're trying to do on the counterattack because Sean McDougal and Jacob Fairfax are going to get the discs back for their offense. Like it's just like a physical law at this point. Like you're right. He's been incredible. I also want to shout out, we keep talking about Lucas Ambrose. There's been other pieces of his defense. Andrew Padula has been on this team for years and years and years. He is now in the top 10 in takeaways this year. He's been a handler specialist for years. He is playing some of his best ultimate. Mitchell Steiner came back to the team after missing a game or two. He looked great. Zach Shackner, shout out, got the Father's Day Callahan this last weekend. Like, it's coming from a lot of sources, which is, again, not something that the Aviators defense has had before. It's felt kind of, where's the playmaking going to come from? Where are these drives going to kind of form? And now it's not only kind of got some clear playmakers in Ambrose and Padula, but it's also got this veteran presence. It's also got some really nice young pieces in Milan Ravenel and Eddie Finley. Like they've got good size. They can throw a couple different looks and rotations at you. To your point, like all of a sudden, even without Valley in the lineup, they won't have Daniel Brunker, who's been really, really good in their D-line. It feels like I have a faith in this LA defense that I wouldn't have had like a month ago. You know, after that Colorado game.
I know these games are always historically close between San Diego and LA. I can't remember a game that was decided by more than like 4, maybe 5 goals. Is there blowout potential in your mind? Could LA just run away with this one? Given that Travis Dunn is missing for San Diego, if the LA defense can just like smother San Diego and their offense is continuing to play at the level that they have been, is there a chance to open this game up and win by like 6+?
No, there's no.
I know. I think no. Also, but I feel like I don't know. On
There's
paper,
literally
I could
too
see
much
it happening.
shared DNA. You know, the amount of transfers back and forth between LA and San Diego is just Looney Tunes at this point.
It's
so
a mega revenge game. It's a revenge game for everyone on LA. They're playing in LA. I don't know.
I mean, it did. The win that the Aviators got 22-21 a few weeks ago did ignite their current winning streak. And so I do think there is something kind of a little bit more talismanic about these victories for either team. You know, San Diego sits at 2-5, ostensibly on the verge of falling out of the playoffs again, or again, for the first time since 2018 or 2017, I should say. They made the playoffs in 2018. So it'd be the first missed playoffs for the Growlers since 2017, and 2-6 is just not a place that they've been in for over half a decade. And so I think that for them, if they can get this win against LA, they say, hey, we're not that far from Oakland, we're not that far from this kind of second seed melee that's happening in that division, and on the flip side for LA, it's continuing this confidence run that they're on. It's continuing to really seize on the hype that we've all kind of been assuming about this team and making it real. Another name that we haven't really talked about recently, who I'm just continually impressed with and continues to add to his game, is Brandon Van Dusen. We talk about the benefits of all these offensive pieces of Giannis and McDougal coming into the system. I mean, Van Dusen was the QB1 of this team last year. He was one of the best deep throwers in the league. He now gets to move slightly off ball and initiate some more of his playmaking. He's added a visible quickness and I think top gear that he didn't have coming into the season, like his ability to go downfield, make plays, and I think just sort of have an acceleration factor that really makes defenses key in and try to address, where he's kind of gravitationally pulling people a little bit apart, and it just sets up so much of the throw and go and the basic stuff that Giannis likes to run. Like, I look at this offense and it's undoubtedly run through Giannis. Its crown piece, its king piece has been McDougal, but Van Dusen has been such a good X factor and special sauce. And if you look at his numbers lately, he is just filling up everywhere. I would say that it's not always as like deep game oriented as it has been in the past for Van Dusen, but he's still just an immensely high volume thrower. He can attack from anywhere in the field. He's now become good as a defender. He's got a couple of huge layout blocks this year, earning the disc back for the offense. Like, he has stood to benefit the most from these offseason additions, and he's really showing kind of the ability beyond the ceiling I think I had for him entering into this season, and really kind of exceeding a lot of expectations that I had for an already great player.
Yeah, well, and there were a lot of questions about like his role and just how things are going to adjust when he was like the guy for LA the past couple of seasons, and Pavel coming in, I just feel like that has just been a perfect pairing. Like they both complement each other so well, and the fact that they can still run those give and go dominator sets and then also occasionally unleash into the deep space. It has been a very effective pairing in that backfield, and I think both players have kind of elevated because of it.
SoCal rivalry will be taking place on Saturday night. We will be tuning in with you then, as well as with all of the Week 9 slate of games starting on Friday night on watch.audl.tv. Again, you can watch all of the games live on the AUDL TV platform. We can't wait to see the results. We will be with you in just a couple days to recap all of the Week 9 action. That'll do it for this episode of Swing Pass. We'll be talking to you soon. Bye now.